Today, our topic that we're starting with today is a very heavy topic and a very important one, especially in this day and age. And it's probably the most famous question that people ask all the time is the question of suffering. I think the way it's phrased is why do good things happen? Why do bad things happen to good people in a world governed by a just God? I think that's probably the best way to phrase the question. The topic is really called, the chapter in the book is called Good, Bad, and Suffering, or the meaning of suffering. And we're really going to delve into these topics today and try to understand what we can. I'll remind everyone that we're actually nearing here the end next week because this is lecture 10, but it's actually the 11th lecture because if you guys recall, lecture 6 was a two-part lecture, and lectures 11 and 12 will be combined into one. So there will be a total of 12 lectures. Next week is our last lecture in this series of lectures on the book. So here we are already. We've made it to the second to last. And what is important also for me to point out, as I did last week when we talked about the meaning of life lecture, is that what I'm presenting here today is not something that I made up. It's not my philosophy or what I've grown to believe from my different studies. I am presenting what the Jewish Torah philosophy is that's been handed down for thousands of years. This is our Jewish heritage, our tradition, and this is based on the knowledge that we received at Mount Sinai 3,300 years ago. And that's why it's very important to start with the questions of evidence, of origin, of clarity, of consistency. And that because when we get to this stage of starting to explain what is the meaning of life, what is the meaning of suffering, anybody who just jumps into a lecture at this stage without having gone through the initial evidence, the foundational questions of who said that the Torah is real or not, who said that God actually gave the Torah, they can find themselves in a situation of hearing this lecture will sound very philosophical, and they'll say, well, all this is very nice that you're presenting, but who says it's right? Who says it's true, right? There's lots of philosophy books that people have written throughout the ages with different views on the meaning of life and on suffering. We could fill, libraries full of these books. But who said that it's true? Who said that it's accurate, not just something that somebody is, making up or something that somebody is deriving from their own worldview, right? Every one of us has had different teachers throughout their life. We've read different books. We've seen different movies. We've interacted with different people. And we've built our worldview based on this subjective reality of our own lives. And it's very important for me to always come back and put the focus on what I'm talking about today and these questions that we're answering. We're not answering them from our subjective reality. We are focusing on what the Torah says, and we've already established. And if somebody's new and this sounds new to them and they haven't heard a lot of this, go back and watch the previous lectures because we've established in lectures 4, 5, and 6 primarily, which deal with the evidence, that it is and highly unlikely, statistically impossible, I would say, that a human being just made up a book like the Torah. And that's a big statement, but we've backed it up with the evidence. We've gone through the different logical things, then we've gone through the different things that the Torah knew about nature and well before human beings could have known. We then went into the entirety of history, of how the Jewish people have survived all of history, and the entire diaspora, and everything that the Jews have been through, and all of the suffering that the Jews have been through, which leads kind of into our topic tonight of why is there this suffering. And we showed that the Torah outlined all of this thousands of years in advance, specifically, without the need for interpretation. The Torah talked about how the Jews would be exiled and hated and thrown out of every country in the world and always remain in a small number. And these are things that we've all been through together already. And we've really established this case for the divinity of the Jewish doctrine. And then, of course, we went on to the lecture of how we preserve this and how it was transmitted. So, very important for me to always remind everyone of that we are not dealing here with some vague philosophy that my philosophy is just as good as anybody else's. This is not my philosophy. What I think or what I believe subjectively, from my own worldview is completely irrelevant. We're focusing on what the Torah is telling us about the meaning of life and the meaning of suffering in these lectures. So, with that, without further ado, we'll get into our topic for today. And first and foremost, we need to make a critical distinction regarding the logical explanation of suffering versus the emotional feeling and pain and suffering that a person may feel. So, once we established in our previous lecture that life has a definitive meaning, it follows that if life has meaning, that suffering must also have meaning. And it's actually it's interesting to note that the moment we really establish that life has a purpose and meaning, that God came and gave us these commandments and told us this is the purpose of your life, and that your real existence is in a spiritual realm, in a place called the world to come, that this world is not final destination. Once we've established that, everything now suddenly has meaning, right? We're really in this place where if life doesn't have a meaning, if there's no answer to the question of why am I here, then there really is no answer to anything else. Because if life is random, and if a person passes away, they die, and that's it, it's over, what meaning is there really to anything? Because anything that is finite and ends isn't really worth much. Sometimes people argue this point with me, and I ask them, do you know your great grandmother's name? And nobody's ever been able to tell me the name of their great grandmother. And if they know their great grandmother's name, I doubt that they know their great great grandmother's name. And my point in that is that people that lived, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, even if they're our own family, right? What impact do they have on our day-to-day life? What did they do that really resonates in our day-to-day life? And there's few people that can point to something like that. But if what they did, if there is no continuation of our existence, what somebody did 100 years ago or 150 years ago or even 50 years ago, it's not really relevant anymore because they lived their life, they passed away, and then more people are born, more people pass away, and this cycle continues and there really doesn't have any meaning to it. I'll take it even further. If we don't have someone to pass judgment on us in the next world, if there is no next world, and if there's no God to look at what human beings have done and reward them or punish them, what really is the difference between any two people, even if we go as far as somebody as evil as Hitler versus somebody who spent their whole life doing kindnesses and helping people? Because if the moment Hitler dies, it's over and there's nobody to judge him, then what does it really matter what he did? He's gone. He doesn't know. He doesn't remember. We might remember, but for him, it doesn't matter, right? And if somebody spent their whole life doing great deeds and they pass away and they don't even know about it because they don't exist anymore. So it's a sad thing to think that people live their lives believing that when they die, it's all over and there's nothing left. Because if that's the case, then what real meaning did your life have? And that's a difficult question for people who don't believe in the life of the soul after the passing of the body. This is a difficult concept to grasp. But in a world that has no meaning, I would argue that suffering also has no explanation. Because if somebody says, look, God forbid, there's no God, there's no judge, there's nobody running the show, there's nobody in charge here, then my suffering is random. It has no meaning. I'm just suffering because I happen to get sick, or not me, somebody else, nobody, you don't want to say about anybody, but a certain person happened to get sick because he is genetically predisposed to that, or because he ate a certain way throughout his life. And the other person, he didn't have a genetic disposition to getting sick and he didn't get sick. So it's all random. Some people get sick, some people get hit by a car, some people live long lives, some people get mental illness. It's just the luck of the draw. This suffering means nothing because the life has no meaning, the world has no meaning. So I know it sounds extreme, but if you follow the logic of what I'm saying, you will see that it is sound. In order for anything in life to have meaning, there first needs to be meaning to life. And from the fact that Judaism tells us that life has a very definitive meaning and a very definitive plan, it follows that suffering must also have meaning. Now, sometimes we may not be able to understand the full extent of that meaning of the suffering, but our lack of understanding does not really mean anything. It just means that we don't understand. So, the point here also that I really want before I start giving a more logical response to this question of why is there suffering in the world is to distinguish, like we said, between an emotional pain, because an emotional pain is a feeling that calls for sympathy and compassion, right? A mistake that a lot of husbands make is when their wife comes home from work and she had a rough day and she wants to now tell them about the day at the office and what horrible things happened to her and how she feels terrible and how she's so upset. And when your wife is doing that, what she really wants is she wants you to acknowledge her pain and acknowledge the hard day she had and identify with it and comfort her. That's all she's really asking for. But a lot of us men, what do? We start giving logical answers to this suffering she went through, right? We start giving her different ideas of how she can resolve it or what she could say to her boss or say to her coworker. We try to logically explain away her feeling, right? And this doesn't have to be a husband, it can be vice versa, but normally it's the husbands are the guilty party, I would say, more in more cases than not, where they try to rationalize their wife's feeling. And sometimes this is even just between friends. Somebody calls and tries to tell you that they're in pain, that they're going through something rough. And rather than identify and empathize with that pain, we try to provide a logical solution to this suffering. And that's really the wrong answer. Because when somebody is suffering, there's no answer to that but sympathy and empathy and to try to identify with them. Because you're not going to solve that suffering in that moment with a logical explanation. So it's important here that we distinguish, like I said, when we're going to be talking about these different scenarios and these very heavy issues, between the emotional pain that someone is currently feeling or felt that and between a logical explanation. And like I said, to suffering, to pain, the only answer I have is sympathy and empathy. But if it's a logical explanation that we're looking for, I believe that the Torah sheds light on this, and we'll be able to examine this with the mind and not with the heart, and get answers to at least a few of these questions today. So, first and foremost, we need to take apart really the question, right? And the scale of suffering is really what turns this into a loaded subject. What do I mean by the scale of suffering? The death of one innocent person, or who we perceive to be innocent, or the suffering of one innocent person, is really the same philosophical question as the suffering or the death of 6 million people. When we boil it down, the question of why do bad things happen to good people in a world governed by a just God, it doesn't really matter if it's 6 million people suffering or one person suffering. The problem is that when it's a large number or a large amount, a mass suffering creates a much larger emotional response in us. But fundamentally, the same question is relevant. When you see somebody who is perceived to be righteous, or you see a child that is suffering that could not have done anything wrong, the same philosophical question can be posed to that one person, on that one situation, as can be to a mass suffering. It's really the same fundamental question. So the first part, let's take this question apart because we really need to define these topics before we can really analyze them. So the first part of the question is, why do bad things happen to good people, right? And in order for us to understand that, we need to first understand what bad means, right? And we need to understand what good means, right? Like any lawyer, anytime you're looking at a document, before you can start interpreting it or figuring out what you're going to do, you have to understand the topics. We got to define these topics, right? The second part of the question that results from the first is, why do the wicked prosper? Right? Sometimes we see someone who appears to be righteous suffering, and we see somebody who we perceive as wicked, somebody who's a liar, who's a thief, who's a murderer. They got away with murder, and they seem to be doing great. And this creates a type of paradox, right? If there's God in the world and he's just, why does he let somebody good suffer and somebody that we perceive as evil, why are they doing great? So we need to understand what wicked means, what evil is. And how do we really apply this measurement? So let's take it apart. I've taken it apart this question into these four categories as we see here. So the first question really is who is righteous? In order to answer this question, we need to know who is righteous, right? What's the measuring stick that defines righteousness? And I'll already say here that what our human perception of innocence is may not, and not may, does not align with the ultimate reality because only God can really judge this question. So first and foremost, do we really know what righteous is when we ask this question of why does a righteous person suffer? The second part is what constitutes suffering, right? Is it merely pain or does it have deeper dimensions? Not everyone that we perceive to be suffering is necessarily truly suffering. Maybe that's how we're perceiving it. Maybe they're in pain, but does that pain mean that they're also suffering? So we really need to understand what is suffering in this world and how do we define it. The third part of the question is who is wicked, right? Just because we see somebody that we think is wicked or they've done things that even we know according to the Torah are wrong, to us it looks very wicked, and we might even have objective evidence to substantiate their wickedness. But this judgment may be incomplete or it may be misguided. We don't know what the weight of their other actions are, and we don't know what they've done behind the scenes or in general. So again, here, our perception of who is wicked is also very, very problematic. And the final part of this question is what really defines success? Not everyone that we perceive to be prospering is truly prospering, and not everyone that we believe to be suffering is actually suffering. So once we've kind of taken this apart, we can see, I think, that this question is a lot more difficult than many people would think when they just throw it out there, right? Sometimes people think that they win this argument in their mind. They come and they say, "Oh, you're religious, you believe in God. Well, how can there be a God if there was a Holocaust, right? If there was a Holocaust, that means there's no God. What are you still believing in this primitive stuff?" In their head, they solved it already, right? Oh, there can't be a God. The Torah isn't real because there was a Holocaust. So because God allowed something to happen that was horrible beyond, I mean, there's no words to explain how terrifying and horrible what happened in the Holocaust was. But because this horrible thing happened in the world, that means that he doesn't exist. The question is kind of problematic in itself because whether God exists or not, that's already talked about in previous questions. That's an objective question, right? Either the world was created or it wasn't, right? It has nothing to do with what happens after, right? Either the world is random or the world was intelligently designed. So when someone comes and says, "How did God let this happen?" Oh, he let this happen, that means he doesn't exist, right? The question in itself is illogical because you're assuming there's a God and then you didn't agree with what you believe he let happen and then you say he doesn't exist. So this question doesn't even really start from a logical standpoint if we think about it. But the real issue here, is that, like we said, with all the four different items that we looked at, is really the problem of subjectivity. The basis of these questions are subjective in nature, and they rely on the judgment of human intellect. These questions themselves are problematic because they're too generalized, right? Our limited perspective really prevents us from seeing the whole picture of a person's life their actions, and their true spiritual state. So the question really doesn't start. But let's break it down a bit more to see what answers the Torah gives us about suffering and how suffering is meaningful in this world and why from heaven they impose suffering on people throughout their life. So the first thing that we need to do, and let me stop here for a moment and ask if there's any questions, because I've kind of we're I don't know how long we're in, about maybe 20 minutes, and I've given you guys a lot to think about so far. So before I delve deeper, does anybody have any question about anything that I've set up to now? Nope. Okay, so we'll keep going. So, redefining good and bad. In our modern world, the concepts of good and bad are usually confused with pleasure and suffering, right? When you ask somebody what's good, ask somebody what's bad, they usually conflate good and bad with pleasure and suffering. In Jewish thought, however, the concept of good is classified as something that brings us closer to our goal. Reframing it this way really kind of changes everything. Because first and foremost, if we establish a goal, right, you have a meaningful destination. Anything that brings you closer to this goal is considered good. Anything that takes you further away from this goal is considered bad, right? It has nothing to do with whether I'm enjoying myself along the way, right? Good doesn't necessarily mean pleasure. Good means to bring me closer to my goal. Bad means to take me further away, right? So going with this logic, if we move on with this idea, let's take an example. It's an example I bring in the book about a high school student and his group of friends who his friends decide to take the day off of school, right? Play hooky. Instead of coming to class, they all decide that they're going to ditch class together and go to the beach. Now, this kid in the class is really focused. This kid, Danny, he's really focused on his studies and he really wants to get into a good university and there's exams coming up. And he's really conflicted about should he skip this day and go with his friends to the beach. So let's assume that Danny made the choice of staying in class and not going with his friends to the beach. He actually went to school. In this scenario, was Danny's choice good or bad, right? Now that we've redefined these concepts to what they actually are, right? If we go back and we look at what we redefine them, it has nothing to do with pleasure or suffering. It has to do with bringing him closer to his goal. So if Danny's goal is to get into a good university and staying in school that day and especially getting all the extra attention because he's one of the only ones there because all his friends went to the beach, right? So he's got some one-on-one time with his instructor. If going to class that day brought him closer to his goal of doing good on his exams and getting into the university that he wants to attend, that means that his decision was good. Even though he suffered. Why? Because he saw everybody else going to do what they wanted and he had to stay in boring old class and he had to work hard. But everybody else got to go and play at the beach that day. So we see that his decision, even though it entailed suffering, was actually good for him. Why? Because it brought him closer to his goal. It's a very simple example, but some truths are the simple truth sometimes is it doesn't need to be complicated, right? We don't need to get into too many philosophical theories. What brings me closer to my goal, and we talked about what the goal is in the previous lecture of the meaning of life, is to perform the commandments in order to come closer to God and to attach ourselves to Him in order for us to be able to have this infinite bliss in the next world from attaching ourselves and coming close to the Creator. So anything that we go through in this world that brings us closer to that goal is good for us. Whether it's painful along the way or not is really not relevant. And this we see also as how somebody in a workout regimen, right? We see that pain is sometimes productive, right? Athletes go through grueling schedules. They go through grueling workouts. They punish their bodies. Football players sit in baths full of ice after the game and they beat themselves up and they work really, really, really hard and they're in a lot of physical pain. But that suffering, right, moves them forward to their goal of being these high performance athletes, right? So the suffering that moves you toward your goal is inherently good, regardless of how it feels in that moment. And anybody who's ever lifted weights knows that in order for you to even start building muscle, you have to first actually tear the muscle that's there. It's painful. We all have that friend that went to the gym, made a gym membership, and decided he was going to do all of the free weights on the first day, right? And then how was he for the next 2 weeks? He couldn't move, right? He tried to do everything all at once, started doing the dumbbells and the bench press, and he got all excited and picked up all the free weights right away, and he tore all it, and he couldn't move for 2 weeks afterwards, right? You got to ease into these things, but the muscles actually tear before the new muscle can build after that, and that can be painful. On the other hand, pleasure just for the sake of pleasure can be counterproductive and even destructive, right? A person can really, really enjoy himself on a night out on the town where he's drinking or using drugs and having this, release and taking substances which release enormous amounts of dopamine and serotonin. And in that moment, he could feel a lot of pleasure. But does that mean that that pleasure is good for him? Most of the time, it's extremely destructive and it's bad for him because it brings him further away from his goal. So now that we've really looked at these concepts, and if nobody has any questions on these issues, let's really see and examine how suffering is a tool that's used by heaven for many, many reasons. And as we discussed in the previous lecture, right, man's final destination is not in this world. It's just not. It's philosophically, logically, we can arrive at that conclusion, but the Torah really outlines, like we talked about last week, that this world is a hallway before the next world. And in the hallway is not where you leave, is not your permanent spot, right? A hallway is only used to go from the living room to the bedroom, right? From one room to the other. You don't leave your bed in the hallway. You don't put your stuff in the hallway. You don't camp out and sleep in the hallway. You don't eat in the hallway. The hallway is used for one purpose, to transfer me from one place to the next. And we discussed at length last week as to why God did it this way and how this world is transient and how everything that we do in it really has that purpose of bringing us to for our infinite existence in the world to come. Now, as I stated, that the Torah teaches that physical suffering is a tool used by heaven to bring a person closer to their goal of attaining bliss in the world to come. I'll explain this through there's many different allegories. We're going to talk about the story of Job and how this plays in, but there's a Hasidic tale that tries to take these concepts that are a bit dry and kind of put them into a parable for us to understand how it works. And the idea of suffering is that any type of suffering or hardship that a person goes through in this world, it kind of cancels out and reduces a lot of the things, a lot of missteps that he may have taken. For example, suffering is even considered in this world. The Talmud asks the question, what is suffering? And you're going to be surprised at this answer. The Talmud answers, when you put your hand in your pocket and you're trying to take out 2 coins, or sorry, you want to take out 2 coins, but you accidentally only took out one. And I could be misquoting, it could be vice versa, that I wanted to take out 1 coin and I accidentally took two. The point is that it didn't go exactly how I wanted. The Talmud defines this as suffering. Why? Because from this small thing we can learn that anything it's kol sheken, anything that's much bigger, right? Somebody gets in a car accident and their car's totaled, or they get sick, or they break their leg. This is definitely suffering, right? If putting your hand in your pocket when you meant to pull out 1 coin and you accidentally pulled out two, and now you have to take the time to reach back in your pocket and put one in, right? If that's considered suffering, then of course, all these other things that are much, much more difficult are suffering. Meaning anything that doesn't go exactly the way you wanted it to and requires you to exert additional effort or additional money than you wanted to spend is a form of suffering. And when we go through life, these different challenges that we face are really part of the tools that heaven uses to get us into the shape that we need to be in spiritually. Um, and this Hasidic tale is told about a man who he came to visit. He came to visit his rabbi, the Rebbe, and he was suffering a lot in his life, different things that were happening in his life. He was sick. He had a problem with one of his children. And while he was sitting outside the Rebbe's room waiting to be received, he fell asleep. And while he was sleeping, he dreamt that he was in the court of heaven, and the ministering angels, they were weighing his deeds, right? And they saw before him, and they put on the scale, on one side of the scale, all the good things that he did throughout his life. And then on the other side of the scale, they started to put all the missteps and all the bad deeds that he did in his life. And he saw that the bad was outweighing the good, right? The bad was up here and the good was down here, and he was very, very, very terrified when he saw this, that this was the reality of where he's standing in the court of heaven. And when he saw this, before it could progress, one of the angels said, "Okay, now we're going to reduce for suffering." And they started taking off on the bad side of the scale. A whole lot of the bad things that he did were reduced because of how difficult it was for him to perform the good things. All the different sufferings that he encountered already for the bad things that he did. Many of the missteps and misdeeds that he committed, he already received the consequence for them in this world. And a lot of the things on the bad side of the scale started to come down. But they stopped right at the point where where the suffering was slightly outweighing what the good deeds were. And in this moment, he cried out in his dream, "More suffering." And then he woke up. That's the Hasidic tale. Now, this isn't a factual story. It's a parable. It's an allegory to really to wrap up a lot of what of our sages teach about this topic into one story. And then, of course, he woke up. The rabbi came out and said, "Hey, you wanted to speak with me?" And he said, "No, no, no, I already got my answer. I understand already." So obviously, we are not going to be requesting for more suffering, right? Nobody is allowed to pray, "God, please let me suffer more." We always pray for the opposite. However, we have to understand that a lot of things we do, even when we're trying to be as good as we possibly can in this world, we mess up. We are human beings and we sin and we make mistakes. And sometimes it's accidental. And sometimes we do things out of our pride and out of anger and out of other base character traits that we haven't been able to fix yet. And people fall on things of pleasure and on anger and on laziness. And there's all sorts of things that we do that we are not perfect and we make a lot of mistakes. Rather than wait for a person to pass away and have to deal with all this in the court of heaven, God lets us handle a lot of that right now in this life already, because this life is very quick. And everything here on a micro level really becomes macro in the next world. Think about it. A person lives here 100 years, right? Not many get to 100, but let's say 80 years, 85 years on average. This is the span of a person's life. In the next world, a billion years isn't even a second, right? There's no concept of time. We're above space and time. Think about that. A billion years isn't even a second. This is an infinite existence. And everything that we do here, one act of kindness, right? One small amount of charity that you give to a person. Think about charity. A person is taking something that he worked hard for, money that it's his life, it's his time, right? Our time is money. It's our time interpreted into something physical, right? A person went and he spent 8 hours working, and then they gave him at the end of the day a certain amount of money. He's turned his life and his time into this money, and you've taken that life and that life force of yours and that time, and you gave it to somebody else that needed it more than you. This is not a small act. This is an enormous, enormous, enormous thing in heaven. This is something that lasts for eternity. We can't understand the scope and magnitude of what a person's good deed does. But unfortunately, we also don't understand the scope and magnitude of what somebody does that is not good. When somebody doesn't help, when somebody transgresses specific Torah commandments and they do things that maim their soul, or they hurt other people, or they steal from other people, or they're dishonest. These things are also have enormous consequence. God, in his infinite wisdom, lets us deal with that, a lot of that within our lives here. So, for example, I had an issue with my car last week, and there's two ways to look at it, right? My car is pretty new, and I hadn't been to a, usually don't have to end up in a mechanic. And then with a new car, you don't expect to be in a mechanic, but lo and behold, I had an issue, and I had to spend money out of pocket because it was something that, warranty doesn't cover. And usually you're in a newer car and you're like, oh, I have warranty and I have nothing to worry about. And look, something happened. Warranty won't cover it, and I'm out of pocket for this expense. There's two ways to look at it. The Jewish view, what do we say? We say, thank you, God. Thank you, God, for letting me handle this situation, for letting me do it this way, because I could have done something, or I could have offended somebody, or I could have reacted in anger in a way when I wasn't supposed to. There's many, many things, a long list of things that I've done throughout my life that I'm liable for. And rather than let it be something worse in this world, or let me have to deal with it later, you're letting me fix it here with having to spend, an extra $500 at the shop. And if somebody goes through their life and realizes that all these things are just for our benefit, that God is always doing it for our benefit, it really changes your view of life, because now, man, there's nothing to really get angry about, right? You're not going to get angry at the mechanic, the guy who sold you the car. You say, Zemi Shamayim, this is from heaven. This is what it is. And I'm grateful that it's this. As soon as a person reacts this way to a suffering from heaven, they usually do a lot to make it even less, whatever they can. But when a person interprets this suffering, which is really a kindness to him, it's really hard for us to it's maybe logically we can understand it, but when a person is emotionally suffering, it's very hard to tell them, hey, this is good for you, right? I don't recommend it, right? The last thing I want anybody from this lecture to do, or after reading my book, is to go up to somebody who's suffering and tell them, hey, chapter 10 of this book says that this is all really good for you. You should be happy you're suffering. That's really, really not the point. Like we said, suffering is we need to approach with empathy. But logically, when a person could get after he gets past the pain, understands that this is something that can only be good for him, it really changes the view of everything. So when we're looking at it this way, what about the other hand? What about the prosperity of the wicked? On this, we have actually some very, very um, concise Torah sections that are really terrifying if we really, really think about what it says here. And I don't like to scare in our lecture, but this is a section of the Torah that when I read is something that is really profound and really has a big impact on me. And I think anybody who really thinks about it can help but be a bit, taken aback. But in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 10, it says specifically, and this is in the five books of Moses, in the book of Deuteronomy. And he, God, will pay to those who hate him promptly, literally, al panav. Hamishalem lesonav al panav leha'avido. And the translation is, and he will pay, and God will pay to those who hate him promptly. Literally, the Hebrew word is to their face, promptly, in order to exclude him, literally to lose him. He will not delay to his enemy, promptly he will pay him. Now, the Talmud takes this apart. Much has been written, books have been written about this verse. And the Torah is really saying here is that when there's somebody who has reached the state where his evil deeds have so far outweighed the good deeds that he's done, God does not want him to come to the next world and claim the reward for the good things that he's done, right? A person who says, hey, I don't believe in the next world, I don't care about the next world, I'm going to live for right now in this moment, and I'm going to do whatever it is that I want in this moment. That person who's demanded everything that this world has to offer, and they don't believe that there's anything left, why should they be entitled to this everlasting bliss, right? I mean, it's not for me to decide. Only God can judge a person's heart and their deeds. But we see in this situation where God says explicitly in the book of Deuteronomy that for the ones that don't deserve it, I will pay him promptly in this world. And what this means is actually terrifying because that means that all the pleasure and all the good that we perceive that this person is receiving is actually a payment right now in this world for the good things that they did, because there's almost no person on the planet that's never done anything good, right? Even the wickedest person on the planet has helped his parents when he was a child, or maybe gave a little bit of charity at some point in life, or helped somebody in some one way or another. And these deeds are big. Even the smallest bit of kindness is a very, very big deal. So rather than allow this person to come to the next world and claim the merit of this one or two or however small little things that he did in this world, God says, you want this world? No problem. I'm going to give it to you, cash payment up front. And this does not mean that anybody that we see prospering in this world is necessarily wicked. Absolutely not. These are not things that we can judge. We can't see a person and say, we really don't know. This is a judgment reserved only for God. But God tells us there is a measure like this of justice. There's an explicit measure like this, meaning that a person can be paid in this world with all the pleasure that this world has to offer, in order for when he comes to the next world, God can say, okay, you don't have, and you can't, everything that that you've gotten has already been paid to you. Anything good that you've done, you've already received your reward from that. Why? Le'avido, in order to exclude him. That's the basics of the passage. I see there's a question, I think, coming in here. Let me take a look at the question. So, first question from Anthony. How do we strike the balance between accepting suffering and fighting suffering to lessen it in the world? So, this is really a tough question. On one hand, the more we study about this and the more we learn Torah and the more we learn about our commandments, then we can understand logically that suffering is a tool. We understand that every bit of suffering has meaning. The more we're able to put that into our head and move it down into our heart and live this way and believe it, it's going to make it a lot easier to accept suffering when it comes along, because there's no way around it. There is, in this world, there's all types of different types of suffering, and people are going to go through hard times, whether it's financially or whether it's with their health or whether with losing loved ones, right? This is a reality of life. And when we face this reality of life, if we are looking at the world as a random place, right? If the world is random, it's terrifying, right? Because there's no one in control, right? I can walk outside and somebody could hurt me and somebody could steal from me and somebody could take from me and I could get run over by a truck, right? If there's nobody running the world, then the world is a scary place. You've thrown, I could get this and I could catch this disease and I could get this disease. People, there's a lot of people that live with this intense fear and anxiety because they believe the world's random. The moment we understand that this is not random and we understand it up here, we can start living with it like this way in our heart. We can start, it makes it easier to accept. That doesn't mean that the pain is going to be less, right? It's just going to help us accept this pain and help us move forward with it. Because when someone loses someone that's close to them, and that's a reality of life, right? Parents pass away and their children have to bury them. And when a child has to bury his parent, and very hopefully it's not the other way around, which is not the natural way of thinking. It's much, much worse for a parent to, God forbid, bury a child. But in any event, a child at some point in the normal course of a healthy life will have to bury his parent, and that is very, very painful. But if that person believes and knows that their parent's life had meaning, and that the Torah says that the respect of the parents is much, much more after they pass away than in their life. The Torah says this in the laws of Kibud Avim, in the laws of respecting one's parents. A person respects his parents much more after they pass away than in this life. In this life, you bathe them, you clothe them, you feed them, you do everything you need to for your parents, you're commanded to. But the real honoring of the parents is only after they pass away, right? Because now they're not here anymore. What are you doing for their memory? How are you living your life? Are you living your life in a way that makes it that it was worth it for them to come to this world? Or are you doing things in this world that in heaven they say to him, look at what your kid is doing, look at what you left in the world? Because ben mezakeh av, a son or a daughter, they actually bring merit to their parents. A parent in heaven who's sitting and looking down at their child who's doing great things and helping people and giving charity and performing the commandments and cleaving to God. In heaven, there is no bigger joy. This helps the parent come closer and closer to God. Look at this jewel you left in the world. But a person that their parents pass away and they just they go off they do terrible things, they pull them up and they pull them up and they say, "Hey, look at what you left in the world. Is this how you raised your kid?" Right? Now, it's not always the parent's fault, but this is a great source of joy or great source of sadness for ones that have passed before us, especially parents and children. So, how do we deal with it? Bottom line is studying, understanding it, living it day to day. Living it day to day means that when something doesn't go your way, you train yourself on the little things like the car got stuck or someone hurt my feelings or I didn't make money on this deal like I thought I was going to. I was disappointed. You train yourself on the smaller things that are kol mishamayim. Everything is from heaven and I accept God, you know better than me. Whatever you do is best for me. I accept it. When you've trained yourself throughout life to speak this way and think this way, when something bigger happens, when somebody gets, God forbid, sick or they lose somebody, automatically they're going to revert to what they've trained themselves. And that's not going to make all the pain go away, but it's going to lessen it because it's going to fill it with meaning and not randomness. Another question that came in here. It's not a question, it's a comment. And thank you, Shlomo. I appreciate the comment. Shlomo is just saying that he's enjoying the lecture, and that it, he really enjoys the message that everything has purpose, and that's just the truth. I mean, I'm just telling you guys the truth. Every single thing that we do has purpose, and we don't even really understand the extent of it. In heaven, there's a magnifying glass. Every little thing we do is huge. And even the smallest thing that we do that we already forgot, oh, I gave a little bit of charity here. Oh, I helped this guy. This guy was stuck with his car. I helped him change his tire. And we move on and we don't realize what a big thing this is. So everything has meaning in this world. So that being said now, I want to talk about, before I talk about this pursuit of, well, I guess we'll talk about this. I want to get to the story of Job, because we're going to get into some deeper Kabbalistic things. But I think I've really covered the point here I just want to make on the question of happiness, right? A lot of people say this sentence, which I really don't like. And then I hear people say this all the time, and they say, the most important thing in life is being happy. If you're happy doing what you're doing, then good for you, right? If you're happy being religious, great. If you're non-religious, great. Whatever works for you, whatever lifestyle works for you, as long as you are happy. This is a big lie. It really is. This is a pluralistic, modern approach to really hide the reality of what true happiness really is. The true happiness we've talked about can only come from striving and attaining one's goals and coming closer to God and fulfilling a purpose, right? When people usually talk about being happy, as they confuse happy with pleasure, just like they confuse good with pleasure and bad with suffering, right? True happiness can only come from striving towards and attaining one's goals. And this is not even a Torah concept. But we would just look at Abraham Maslow's pyramid, right? In Psychology 101, if we go back to the first year of college, we learn about Abraham Maslow's pyramid that talks about the different hierarchy of needs, where we need our base needs and air and then food and then shelter. And at the top of the pyramid is self-fulfillment. And for a person to truly feel this feeling of happiness, it only really comes from an internal feeling of self-fulfillment. So goal-oriented happiness and not falling into the pleasure trap, which is usually what people say when they mean the most important thing is being happy. Now, as we said, each person's situation is extremely complicated. Heaven alone can judge a person's deeds. It is not our place to judge other people, to look at what they've done and say, oh, you're suffering because you did this. It's not our job to interpret things this way. We are we need to lelamed zchut. Lelamed zchut is we need to see the good in people. We need to focus on the good things that people do. We don't need to look at all the negative things that a person does, even if you see that they're doing a lot of negative things. There's almost nobody that's void of good things. Rather than focus on the bad, it is our job to see the good in people and to talk good to them and to lift them up. And that's what God wants from us because God doesn't want us to focus on their shortcomings. God knows what their shortcomings are. He wants to hear what's good about them. He wants you to see what's good about them. And in a Kabbalistic sense, when a person is always focused on the negative in another person, if you hear somebody always complaining about other people and why is he like this and why is he like that and these people are like this and they're focused on the negative, that's really the issue is really with them. Because in the person who can only see bad in others means that he has this somewhere inside himself also, right? Because someone who is completely fixed their character traits, all they have for the other is compassion and kindness and understanding. Now, this doesn't mean we need to be completely naive, right? If there's something bad happening, we need to distance ourselves from it, right? We need to distance our children from bad influences. I'm not saying be naive and just pretend that everything's great, but wherever we can see in a situation the good side, and wherever we can help another person, and by the way, you'll never help somebody by focusing on their shortcomings. If you want to help somebody and you criticize them and you focus on what's wrong with them, you will never be able to help them because the person doesn't want to hear how bad they are and what's wrong with them. Believe me, they know. When you come to somebody and you tell them what's good about them and how you admire them and how you admire how they handled a certain situation, this creates a bond with them because they see that you naturally care about them. And this is the opening of being able to have a positive influence on somebody only by showing them love and compassion first. You will never be able to really have any kind of profound and lasting effect on somebody by focusing on the negative and their shortcomings. I see a question here from Benny. I heard a long time ago that if we do not have our sefirot in balance, we can cause certain cancers or ulcers to our body. Is this true, Rabbi? Have you heard such a thing? So the concept of sefirot, the 10 different attributes of, I really don't want to get into that in this lecture. These are deeper Kabbalistic concepts. Um, in general, in general, the idea of suffering in this world and punishment in general, we talked about last week, is self-imposed consequence. So I can answer your question from this view. There's nothing, no, nothing bad emanates from God. No suffering emanates from God. Everything has to do with our choices either in this life or a previous life. And that's a little difficult to understand in certain situations. We'll get actually that when we get into the story of Job now coming up. But the idea of punishment or getting sick because sfirot are out of balance really has to do with a person's actions. The Torah is in Hebrew means instruction, and it's an instruction manual for the soul, for the physical world and the spiritual world. And just like if a person neglects their physical body in this world and doesn't eat healthy and doesn't work out and smokes cigarettes all day and doesn't just doesn't take care of their body, there's going to be consequences. As you said, like in the Sefirot, they're going to go out of whack, right? If we're going to do this parallel, they're going to come out of balance. Same thing with spirituality. If a person is not doing what they need to do and not performing the commandments or refraining from things they're not supposed to be doing, whether in this life or a previous one, that's the big thing that we're going to talk about next, is that this causes an imbalance and it causes things to go wrong. And sometimes and part of suffering is to help put that back into balance. And there's other reasons too. Sometimes when a person comes to a low point, it helps them come up from there. A lot of people, when their heart is haughty, right? The Torah says, "Vayishman Yeshurun vayivat." O kochi ve'otzem yadi asali et achai elazeh. The Torah warns us that when God will give you prosperity and you have everything that you've ever wanted, don't forget, be careful not to say that my own strong hand, my ingenuity, my own wisdom brought me all this good fortune. So sometimes when a person is in a really high place and they're doing really well financially, it brings them up to where they think they're in charge, they're running the show. And sometimes God uses certain tools to bring a person back down because sometimes from a low point of suffering and pain, or from somebody losing finances or losing their business suddenly, this is a place they can rediscover their connection with God. So, in that moment, a person could think his business is the most important thing in the world. How can it be that I lost my business? And they're focused on that when what God really wanted to do was to bring him closer to him and say, look, you got way out of proportion. You started thinking that you're running the show here, and I love you. I want you back. I want you to understand you're not running the show. And if you didn't get it, didn't get the message earlier, because usually what happens is God sends smaller things first, right? And if a person isn't listening and they're not spiritually in tune to the smaller sufferings and the smaller things going wrong, then unfortunately, God's got to bring a bigger one, right? And it's not to punish, it's to fix, it's to bring closer. So I hope that answers your question in an indirect way. So the big question here, people will say, okay, fine. I get it. I misbehaved. I did something bad. I deserve a measure of suffering rather than given to me in the next world. God's letting me handle it here. Great. What about children? What about a 5-year-old kid that gets really, really sick? Right? He didn't do anything that he could potentially be punished for in this world, right? He doesn't have any commandments that he needs to fulfill yet, not Noahide commandments or 613 the Jewish commandments, right? So how can it be that an innocent child suffers in this world if they haven't done anything that could require this cleansing, right? This is a really, really difficult question, especially from an emotional standpoint. But the logical answer that the Torah explains is really the answer of reincarnations. The Torah really talks about this. The secret part, you're not going to find this in the Pshat, you're not going to find this in the 5 books of Moses, but in the oral law and the Kabbalah, that deals at great length, especially the Arizal, Shara Gilgulim, deals with this at length. I don't know if everybody knows that. This might be the first time you're hearing that, but Judaism absolutely talks about reincarnations. That means, and actually, most of us here today are reincarnations. There's almost no new souls that have come down to the world at this part of history, according to the Kabbalists. So at this point in time, every one of us has already been here in one form or another, perhaps multiple times. And that is the Kabbalistic reality that every one of us here didn't complete everything we needed to do in the previous go around. And we are here again with another opportunity to fix and let the kin to fix this. So, and this is really how the Kabbalists explain and understand the story of Job. If we read in the book of Job, right, in the Torah, we have the book of Job, and it's a very, very odd book on a superficial glance, right? When you just read this book, you don't understand what's happening here, right? There's a person here that is named Job who is righteous, and God says he's righteous. God says there's absolutely nothing that this person sinned. God himself says nothing that he did wrong. You read it in the phrases. Now, Satan is allowed, right? Satan, and here we have to understand this concept because Christianity has completely taken the idea of Satan and warped it into this power that is like fighting against God and that he is this alternative power to God, which is not the case. Absolutely in Judaism, that is a duality. Satan has no power of his own. He is an angel, just like any other angel, carrying out God's will, and there is no battle here between the God and Satan, as Christians have kind of taught the world over. But Satan here comes and says, if I give Job enough suffering, he will curse you. And you guys can go through and read the book of Job and see all the horrible things that happened to Job and how he refused to curse God. And when you just read the story, you say to yourself, like, what is the point of this story? I mean, if this guy's righteous, what's this whole thing with Satan and why is he giving him the suffering? And does God not know already that the suffering isn't going to make him curse? Like, why are they playing this game with Job? And what are we supposed to learn from it? At a superficial glance, it's a really tough book to learn and to really understand. on a deeper level, now I'm not going to get into all the different things because the more odd something looks, usually the more wonderful and amazing it is once you study it deeper and you really start understanding what's going on there. Because a lot of the biggest secrets of the Torah are hidden in these types of places that are at a superficial glance really illogical or something that you don't understand or we don't understand with our logic. But the Arizal teaches in Shara Gilgulim that the reason, and this is also found in certain passages there of where God, things that he says to Job, and this is where the Kabbalists explain it from these different passages, that Job really was righteous in this life, in that current reincarnation. But when God says to him, "Where were you?" God's answer was, "Where were you when I created the world?" Right? If you think you have questions, right? Job is saying, how did this happen? Like, how could this happen to me? Right? And all his friends come and tell him, "You must have sinned." And he says, "I didn't." And he says, "I didn't do anything." And how could I lost my money and my children died? And how could I have done this? And God's answer to him was, "Where were you when I created the world?" And the Kabbalists explain that Job is a reincarnation of Terach. Terach was Abraham's father. Avraham Avinu, Abraham, who are the father of Judaism. His father was a man who was a mass distributor and manufacturer of idols. This is the home that Abraham grew up in. So while it was true that Job was righteous in that reincarnation, in his previous reincarnation, he wasn't. And all of the sufferings that were visited upon him in this reincarnation were as a means to clean him from what he did in that previous life rather than have to deal with it in the next world. Because they say that of his son, Avraham, the Kabbalists believe in this, the son can reward the father. The father, in the son's merit, a father can really rise to amazing heights. And how can you take a father, even though he was a manufacturer of idols, how can he lose his share in the world to come when he brought into the world someone like Abraham, where everything is from Abraham, right? All of Judaism, the entire Torah, everything was created. Abraham is the source of everything. So in this situation, he was given this opportunity to cleanse it in this world. So this is a genuine condolence for everybody that knows that a child that passes away in this world that could not have done anything wrong in this life, it could not possibly be for anything they did in this life. That means that they had to clean something that happened in a previous life. And with their passing, that task was completed. And the Torah and the Kabbalah and also the oral states that any child that passes away at this age is automatically eligible for the world to come because they came to this world and they passed away and they had no sin in them. So it can only be for something that happened in a previous life. So to answer these questions in general, I think that the best thing that we can see in general, the most logical approach to all of these difficult questions is that our inability to see previous chapters of our lives and our incomplete understanding of what lies ahead disqualifies us from any legitimate complaint, logically speaking. Now, if somebody's in pain and they're yelling because it hurts and they're suffering, we understand that. But logically, a person who does not know what his previous reincarnation is, he also doesn't know, forget about reincarnations. He doesn't know what he did in this world. I mean, he knows certain things. I'm sure there's a lot of things he could sit and write a list. Every one of us, if we sat and write a list of the things we've done wrong, it'd be a very long list. So our inability to see what our balance owed is, what we've done good, what we've done bad, to see the complete picture, to see who we were in our previous life, what we did, what we need to fix. Our inability to see this picture, like God said to Job, "Where were you when I created the world?" really disqualifies us from any legitimate complaint. When we suffer, we must know that God has our best interests at heart, and in no way is the suffering meaningless. And that's really, really the most important thing here to understand is that every bit of suffering has meaning. So not only is it not meaningless, it serves as a central tool for bringing us closer to God and to a better position in our eternal life in the world to come.